This is the story about our American Revolution. British General Lord Cornwallis could not suppress the American rebellion in the South. Frustrated by losses at Kings Mountain, Cowpens, and Guilford Courthouse, Cornwallis moved his army north to Virginia in an effort to turn off the spigot of French aid that was helping fuel the American resistance. By establishing a military base of operations at Yorktown, Cornwallis could be reinforced by British Royal Navy supply ships, vessels that were soon engaged in a fierce naval battle off the Virginia Capes. While French and British ships battled for control of the Chesapeake Bay, Generals George Washington and Rochambeau were marching their troops and wagon trains south through Virginia to lay siege to Yorktown, entrapping Cornwallis and his entire army. This is the story of that march.
Hello, and welcome to the Real American Revolution, where we explore what really happened before, during, and after America's War for Independence. The following series, retracing the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route, is sponsored by the National Park Foundation and the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route Association, commonly referred to as W3R US. My name is Randy Flood, and I'm your host for this entire series. Today we're at College Creek, Williamsburg, a very important historic site, and I'm joined by Dr. Robert Seelig, America's foremost expert in the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Flood, for your introduction again, as we both make our way to Yorktown and Victory along the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Trail. Now, if you remember back, I said that the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route traces the roads and the routes on water and on land that Allied forces are taking to Yorktown. Here at the James River, we will talk about the water aspect of this revolutionary route, Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route. Why are we here today? In July of 1781, and then in August of 1781, when the letter arrives from Admiral de Grasse that he is sailing to the Chesapeake rather than to New York, Washington decided that he had to move to Virginia as well. He had also hoped that as he is marching his forces and French forces to Virginia, that he would find enough vessels, enough boats at the head of Elk near Plum Point to board all his troops and to sail to Virginia, because the water route is a much faster route than walking on land. Well, when he got to Plum Point on the northern edge of the Chesapeake Bay, there were not enough boats to carry all of his troops. So what Washington and Rochambeau do, they embark about half of the Continental Army and the Grenadiers and the Chasseurs and the infantry of Lauzon's Legion on board of vessel, and they sail off for Virginia. The rest of the Allied armies marches on to Baltimore, where Washington had ordered the quartermaster to collect more boats. When the Allied armies get to Baltimore, the French forces, the French general at the time, the Baron de Villemaisnil, has the boats inspected and says, I'm not putting my men on any of these boats, we're going to march on. But the Continental Army, the rest of the Continental Army, embarks on board of these boats. As French forces continue marching toward Virginia, a messenger arrived from Admiral de Grasse saying, I have sent boats to Annapolis please march to Annapolis. And it's in Annapolis that all of the rest of the French army embarks on board vessels. So in the early days of September, we have boats carrying French and American forces, boats that started in Plum Point, head of Elk in on the northern tip of the Chesapeake Bay, boats that had sailed out of Baltimore, and ships that had sailed out of Annapolis, all of whom are making their way down to the Chesapeake Bay and to the James River here. On all of these boats are men, soldiers, and officers who keep an account of their experiences, what it is like to sail down here to take on Lord Cornwallis. Lord Cornwallis, who is now in Yorktown, knowing or at least fearing that he is captured now that the Battle of the Capes has been decided and the siege ring around British forces has been concluded and has been closed. All of these men, I said, or a number of these men at least, keep journals, keep diaries, keep an account of their experiences on their journey down the bay. And I want to quote you some of these men and their experiences they write down, usually in old age, as they reflect on their lives. And I want to go back to some of the names that you may be familiar with because we mentioned them earlier today. One of them is our young man named John Hudson, the 13-year-old soldier in the New York Regiment, who tells his story in 1844. He writes, "We sailed to the mouth of James River, encountering an equinoctial storm of remarkable fury which lasted 8 days, checking our progress the entire period, sweeping our decks fore and aft, and drenching us all to the skin. To crown our troubles, we had nothing to eat but coarse barley bread baked for the horses, which had become moldy and wormy, but we were fain to use it as an alternative to starvation. On the 25th of September, we reached our place of debarkation, 40 miles up the James River and 6 miles from Williamsburg. Here we drew provisions and made the first meal for 8 days in any degree of comfort." It was not a pleasant sailing down the Chesapeake, but where he lands is right here. Imagine you were here in the early days of September of 1781. Rather than this quiet river here, this river would have been filled with literally hundreds of boats that had carried Continental Army and French Army soldiers from Plum Point, from Annapolis, and from Baltimore to here. And the soldiers that had been sailing on de Grasse's vessels were being shuttled back and forth. It would have been a very, very busy place in September of 1781. Now, if our young man, John Hudson, had poor food to eat, at the very least he got here safely. Another man that we already talked about earlier was Asa Reddington, a 20-year-old soldier in the light infantry. He writes in his reminiscences, "Our company sailed from Annapolis in an old sloop whose hold was filled with hogsheads of tobacco, and after being out several days, the vessel sprung a leak and had to put in at Porpoise Harbor, Virginia, where she was abandoned as unseaworthy." So we have a soldier who is on one of those old vessels where the French officer said, "I'm not putting my men on there," who is shipwrecked. But there's always a good side to everything, as you can imagine, because as he writes, "We camped on the shore there and secured plenty of food from the farmers in the neighborhood and had the pleasant change of having plenty to eat for a week. Then we set sail in another old hulk to James River, where there were more than 20 French ships of the line lying at anchor in command of Comte de Grasse. They were indeed huge masses and made a most formidable appearance. So if you think back when I just said it was an incredibly busy place, the vessels that had carried the French soldiers from Annapolis, as well as the vessels of Admiral de Grasse, would have been out there, and you could see the masts. One soldier said was like a whole forest of masts that could be seen out there. And as Reddington ends his account, we sailed up the river 20 miles, landing on the north bank, where we worked hard several days, dragging up heavy cannon to be used in the siege of Yorktown. And if you ever go to the Yorktown Victory Center, you will see one of those cannon in there that was used in the siege of Yorktown. But it's not just, of course, not just American forces that sailed down the bay, it's also French forces. And their experiences were not any better than those of their American allies. The Comte de Louverture, who sails from Head of Elk on the 7th of September, says that in the morning of the 12th, all the detachments embarked and we set sail at 5 p.m. 3/4 of our galleys were loaded with bombs, cannonballs, and overloaded with soldiers and did not have a single foot above the waterline. That's how heavily they were loaded. All the conductors understood the need for prudence. They all agreed to hug the shore and anchored near Annapolis. The sea was very rough, and the surf could be disastrous for us because we were loaded with bombs and cannonballs. And at various times they all rolled onto the same side, and we were 2 fingers from perishing in this position. We came about and packed ourselves against one another, 60 grenadiers of the Centauns regiment. We all had to sit on the bombs to keep them safe. That was not a very pleasant ride down the Chesapeake Bay either. What is important in this account that Comte de Louverture has is the fact that he's the only officer who mentions the fact that African Americans are involved in this transportation of Allied forces down the Chesapeake Bay. He writes that we worked with every possible effort. After the inspection of the galleys which were to transport us, it requires a sense of duty rather than desire to avoid a hard march to risk our lives on boats, some lacking masts, others leaking water everywhere, many more commanded and operated by a single Negro. What he is pointing out is that African Americans are a part of daily life. Wherever you go, you see African Americans, and even some of the boats that take soldiers down the Chesapeake Bay. American officers and American soldiers never mention that. For them, it's so common that they are surrounded by African Americans and working with African Americans that they don't even mention it, because African Americans are a part of everyday life in revolutionary America. So if you want to learn about life in revolutionary America, it is very good to sometimes look at sources and accounts by outsiders, because they will point out things that an American would never point out. The Yorktown campaign, including bringing the soldiers down the Chesapeake Bay for the siege of Yorktown, includes and is also made possible by the contributions of dozens of African Americans on these boats. Dozens of African Americans, if you look at the registers, who are more valuable to their owners than the boats that they are traveling on.
Bob, thanks so much for enlightening to the value of and importance of College Creek here in Williamsburg. To our viewers, thank you for watching. On behalf of the Real American Revolution, This is Randy Flood. So long for now.